So that's what I want to talk about for a few minutes, is just the spiritual condition of the preacher. And I think that rises in relevance depending on how you define the goal of our work. And I would say our aim is to bring people into contact with the glory of God and all that He is for us in Christ in such a way that we are changed from one degree of glory to the next. And you can hear 2 Corinthians 3:18, which to me has been, for preaching, one of the most powerful texts in the New Testament. We all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, so beholding the glory of the Lord, are being changed from one degree of glory to the next. This comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. Now, if you ask Paul, where do Christians behold the glory of the Lord? You got to get rid of the chapter division, because 18 is the last verse. The very next chapter says, the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So I think the answer is the gospel, the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ is the glory we were looking at when we were being changed from one degree of glory. So I would generalize and say the Word of God, the whole counsel of God, centered on the gospel of Jesus Christ and His saving work historically and now. As we behold that, as our people behold that, they become more and more like the image of Christ, which is what we want the world to be filled with, the glory of God in the image bearers of His people, the new image of Christ. That's what we want. And I don't think it's possible for us to do that. That is, to be an agent of that, to take this book and open it in such a way that people see supernatural, spiritual glory in the face of Christ, in the Word, in the gospel. I don't think that's possible if we ourselves don't see it or are so contaminated with habits of sin that we obscure it and quench the Holy Spirit in our lives with sin, which ups the ante of becoming a kind of person for the sake of the ministry of the Word and for the sake of the transformation of the people. It just ups the ante just about as high as you can go. So as I have thought about, so what's the strategy for us to become preachers who enable people to see, behold the glory of God? And the first thing I want to do is contrast it with advice that a preacher gave, and you probably remember who said this, but I'm not going to say it. He said, you know what preachers need to be really effective is to watch a lot of good comedians, because they know how to connect. Now, I think that's bad advice. I've said it before. I don't think the reason we're not connecting for eternal purposes, not just clever, interesting purposes, I don't think the reason is because we don't watch enough comedians or we haven't picked up enough cultural savvy to sound cool. I don't think that. Cool doesn't save anybody. I think the reason is we're not a certain kind of person. I said to missionaries who've gone out and come home, and they confirm this, what that culture needs from you is not, wow, I've figured out some really cool, redemptive analogy that connects the gospel with their culture. Those are valuable, really valuable. But what they need to see is this is a man of God. This man is supernatural. This man walks in the Spirit. This man is connected to the living creator of the universe. This man embodies what he says. So my challenge is, at age 72, I still want so bad to do this, is to become what Paul prays for here. For this reason, I'll bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory. And you just pause and let that sink in. Paul is connecting this prayer with according to the riches of his glory. That's infinite. He's totally rich. I mean, God owns everything, and the riches consists in his glory. According to those riches, he may grant us to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being. We've got to have that. We've just got to have that. So that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, which has always baffled me because he's in every believer, or you're not a believer, so what are you praying for that Christ to dwell in your heart? Which I think must mean there are more manifest dwellings, more manifest demonstrations of his presence, something like that. That you, being rooted and grounded, these two images, building and plant, tree, rooted and grounded in love, his love, I think, may have strength to comprehend. Like what? You need strength to comprehend? Strength to comprehend? The strength that's coming from the rootedness in love so that we can comprehend. Yes, if you're going to preach like this, comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, and be filled. I can remember praying this hundreds of times in my 33 years, filled with all the fullness of God. I mean, if that were just some non-inspired person telling me that would be a great idea, be filled with all the fullness of God. Say, that is so off the charts, unrealistic. But this guy is inspired, and he's praying it for his people, filled with all the fullness of God. And there have been very few times in my life where I could have stepped back and say, yep, got that. I'm there. And yet, that's where we're supposed to go. So my first answer to the spiritual condition of the preachers is that. That prayer coming true, me filled with all the fullness of God, me rooted in the love of God, me having power to comprehend the height and depth and length and breadth, and to know, and I skipped right over that amazing phrase, to know the love of Christ that passes knowledge. Know what can't be known. Know what can't be known. Know what can't be known so that you can make known to your people what can't be known. I mean, wouldn't that get close maybe to what Paul is getting at in Philippians 4 when he says the peace of God that passes understanding? In other words, there's something that happens in the spiritual person in whom Christ is really manifestly dwelling. He has experiences that transcend the capacity of the mind to explain. I think that's what the church needs. I think that's what preaching should long for. I want to stand in this pulpit so that my people are transfixed with the glory of God, mediated, like we're saying, through this fallible personality. So that's the first thing, is praying that reality into my life. And when it takes that phrase, rooted in love, I say, where and how does that happen? How do I sink roots? And this week I've been working on look at the book on Psalm 1. I made 8 lab look at the books on Psalm 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law, or the instruction of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night, and he will be like a tree planted by streams of water. That's rootedness. What are the streams? I think the stream is the stream of grace running out of the Word. You meditate on the law of the Lord day and night, you'll be like a tree. What kind of tree? In the desert, shriveling? No, by a stream. Constant gushing life and hope and joy up into these roots so that your leaves don't wither, and in everything you do, you prosper in the ministry. love to talk about that longer, because I really think that's literally true. Everything you do. In fact, I will talk about it. This is a parenthesis. This is a rabbit trail or a parenthesis. I'm going to lose my train of thought here for sure. But when you preach on a text like everything he does prospers, you know your people are saying, "No, are you kidding me? Financially, it's not working. Sexually, it's not working. With the kids, it's not working. I am not prospering in everything I do." And this text just said, if I meditate on the law of the Lord, everything is going to prosper. Tell me if you think this is okay. I think the psalmist knew that very well, because the rest of the Psalms, in fact, the one you choose, we have experiences are not prospering. That's right. We are sensing abandonment. And Psalm 44, verse 22, Paul quotes, "We are being killed all day long. We are counted as sheep to be slaughtered." And the protest is, this isn't owing to my sin. Right. If I had turned from you, you'd know it. I haven't turned from you, and I'm being slaughtered. That's not prospering. And yet he says it. Right. So he's not stupid, and he's not contradicting himself. It means something. And he says, in everything you do, you prosper. So it says in Ephesians 6:8, you shall receive from the Lord every good that you do. You shall receive from the Lord every good that you do, meaning you'll be appropriately rewarded for every good you do. In the world, that good deed might get you, as a slave, beaten. Because that's the context. He's talking to slaves. Get you beaten. Didn't look like he prospered. He didn't prosper. He just got beat. Right. And Paul says, whoa, your perspective is way too small here. I think this text would be pointing, in everything he does, he prospers, is pointing in the long range. There's going to show up a Messiah. He's going to die. In dying, he's going to see to it that everything we need is going to be provided, and everything that's bad is going to be turned for good. And then one more text that I thought of. You can ask me questions later about this if you think it's manipulating the text. At the end of 1 Corinthians 15, it says, "Be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing in the Lord your work is not in vain." And I was taught, so what's the opposite of in vain? What's the positive way of saying in vain? Prosper. Fruitful. It's going to prosper. It's not going to be in vain. It's going to prosper. So you got two texts. You got Ephesians 6:8. You got 1 Corinthians 15:58 telling me everything I do is going to not be in vain and is going to be wonderfully rewarded, so nothing will have not prospered eventually. Okay, close that parenthesis, rabbit trail, over. But my main point I'm trying to make is that the spiritual condition of the preacher is not mainly culturally conditioned. It's mainly seeing the glory of God in the face of Christ, from one degree of glory being changed to delight in that glory and love that glory and live that glory in all lowliness and meekness and servanthood and Christ-likeness, like your text on Philippians 2. He became a servant all the way down. That's his glory. And we get there by praying, Ephesians 3:14 following, and by meditating on the law of the Lord day and night and living that out. So, all that to say, our work is great, and we cannot approach it lightly without spiritual preparation.
As you're studying a text, it's landing on you with fresh power as you're studying it, and you're becoming undone because it's revealing an area of sin, of brokenness, of failure. How much transparency do you bring into the pulpit that this has been working on me before you bring it to your people?
Yeah.
And how do you do that?
Bring it. Well, Paul, the reason I'm not like Jonathan Edwards, you can read 1,000 Jonathan Edwards sermons and not know a thing about this man, except what he loved about God. You don't know anything about his kids, his marriage, his house, his community, it's hardly word. This man the Puritans did not believe in bringing their experience into their preaching. Paul did. I mean, who are you going to go with, right? The Apostle Paul is all over He's just all over. 2 Corinthians, Romans 7. So all that to say, yes, we're going to do this. We're going to be real with our people. Now, the question is, how much and how? And there's several guidelines. One would be not in a way that hurts your wife or your kids. And that's tough because most of my issues are there. I mean, if you want to find out John Piper's besetting sin, it's not going to be in a hotel room with a harlot. It ain't going to be there. But it's going to be big time responding unkind to my wife, or something with my children, or something on the staff. So if I go trying to describe that conflict, she's going to be implicated also. Right. So there's the first principle, is protecting others while you unprotect yourself. Takes a real discerning to do that. A second thing is how to talk about certain things with kids in the audience. And after those, two principles, I would say enough so that they know you're real, you're not afraid, and probably tell them, I try to be candid with my elders, my wife, and my small group. And you don't hear everything. You don't hear all my sins, but you'll hear enough, they'll hear enough to know he knows he's a sinner. He knows he's saved by grace. He's not a hypocrite. He's not trying to pull a wool. And that amount will, I think, win you their trust and protect them from something unhelpful.
Many pastors and preachers will talk about seasons in their life where they're dry, where they're depressed, but they get in the pulpit and at least have to project that they're passionate and that these truths are close to them, but deep in their souls, they're not. And you're known for being a very passionate person in the pulpit. Do you relate to that, or is that something more that you don't get what they're saying, or?
My conviction of not faking it in the pulpit does really raise the stakes of battling from Thursday's depression to Sunday's passion. Right. And the battle really, really gets intense because I don't want to say rejoice in the Lord, and I'm not. Right. So I'd say two things. It's okay to say to your people, you know what? I don't preach me, I preach Bible. And this Bible says rejoice. And there are many reasons. And I'm giving to you what they are. But frankly, between Thursday and now, it's been pretty hard. Yeah. They'll love that. And it may be that God would give you the gift of joy in the very preaching. But you just tell them. But so that I combine the two things. Right. The two things are being honest and saying it's okay. I'm not all there. Right. And the other one is I preach Bible. Right. And I think that really is my salvation, has been my salvation. I mean, frankly, it may sound excessive, but I don't remember ever going into the pulpit not loving what I'm about to say. Maybe loving what I'm about to say is not exactly the same as experiencing it to the full, but it's close. Right. I don't like the advice, preach like you love Jesus. Because that just sounds so hypocritical to me, so unreal. Unless, in your mind, what that means is, this is a way of loving Jesus. Right. This, like I love Jesus, is not bubbling over from sweet love for Jesus, but it is a love for the people and a love for Jesus that I'm acting like I love Jesus. Maybe. I just, all you need to hear there is, I worry about that counsel. I think it's better to say, be honest and preach the scriptures And if they say rejoice and give 5 reasons for rejoicing in Philippians 2, then give them those reasons with all your heart. And then weep your eyes out afterwards that you don't have it.